Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm massively excited to be making this video. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to make a YouTube channel trying to navigate the obscurities and fucking weirdness of tank design. I hope you will join me in this excitement, for today we're going to learn what an infantry tank is. But not just that, if you stick through to the end of the video, I've got a bit more context that I personally think is vital to discovering why tank development is absolutely amazing. And also, the amount of knowledge is so vast that it's almost impossible to cover. Certainly not in one of my videos. But more specifically, how infantry tanks came to be. I'll be trying to explain things like their origin story, the ideas behind their development, and the stress testing of these vehicles, and how eventually all of these things were crucial for what we know and love today in the shape of the best modern main battle tank in the world, the Challenger 2. So let's get into it. The premise is pretty simple. Any tank that is specifically designed with the idea to support infantry close up on the front line is an infantry tank. However, the concept of these specialised vehicles as a whole saw a wealth of innovation from the blood-soaked quagmire of the Somme in 1916 right up until the end of World War II, where new ideas of superior tank designs were emerging. At the outbreak of war in 1914, men and officers marched into battle with the mindset of old, 19th century tactics with big columns of men in bright uniforms, proudly displaying their swords in a time where the cavalry charge was the height of mobility. They exited the war in 1918 with small units of individually skilled soldiers, all specialised in their own specific role. They had armoured cars, bomb-dropping aeroplanes, and one of the most infamous inventions of the war, the tank. The world had entered an age of total mechanical warfare, and when early tanks had helped soldiers break through the lines and cross the trenches and barbed wire they had withheld for years, they earned their right as a weapon with war-winning potential. The post-war armies of Great Britain and France soon realised that tanks were not all the same, and so during the interwar period, they started production of many different variants to fulfil different roles. The focus of this video is going to be Britain's story, and so, in the build-up to World War II, the United Kingdom had expanded that concept through a variety of tanks to conquer whatever issues were faced on the battlefield. Amongst the most notable were the cruiser tanks and the infantry tank. Cruisers were fast and manoeuvrable. With the ability to flank, they effectively replaced the cavalry's role on the battlefield, whereas the infantry tanks were basically the armoured battering rams of World War II, built to survive entrenched onslaughts, provide infantry support, and push forward one slow step at a time to achieve total combined arms victory. In May 1934, the Royal Tank Corps approached Vickers for a design to a tank for infantry cooperation that could survive all existing anti-tank weapons and be cheap enough for mass production in peacetime. The next year, Vickers had a two-man tank design with a machine gun, and it was powered by a civilian Ford V8 engine. The prototype weighed about 10 tons, but brought a near impenetrable monster of the time onto the battlefield. That level of armour was unheard of, and with it actually being very mechanically reliable, it ticked a lot of boxes. However, it could only bring that armour at a blazing speed of 8 miles an hour, and only being armed with a Vickers heavy machine gun, it soon needed an upgrade. This was the A11 infantry tank, otherwise known as Matilda 1. This vehicle is the first practical expression of a tank designed to have designated roles with infantry tanks and cruiser tanks, which had different functions and tactics, as well as being supplied to separate units and formations. The cost in design and production of the A11, which itself was too small for a radio, led to work on a successor, the A12, in 1936. The A12, also known as Matilda II, earned infamy very early in the war when it fought in France and across the desert. Its gun, the British 2-pounder, was actually a very potent gun for its time and calibre, and could generally engage its German counterparts on equal grounds. Because of its accuracy, velocity and rate of fire, it was very effective against all fairly lightly armoured tanks, Panzer Is, IIs, early 3s and 4s, and pretty much anything Italian. But its 40mm diameter limited its high explosive drastically for anti-personnel, and as armour grew thicker, its relatively low penetration became a hindrance on its effectiveness. However, with the Matilda II, German guns, even up to 88mm, struggled to stop it as its armour proved incredibly tough, and due to its cast construction, it shrugged off rounds that, at their calibre, would smash the same thickness of welded plate armour, easily earning its name Queen of the Desert. Infantry tanks are often discredited for having low-powered engines and a slow top speed, but for what they were designed for, which was to advance with the infantry and not outrun them, they were more than sufficiently powered, and then subsequently geared in a way that gave them incredible torque to climb and traverse rough ground. A notable example of a vehicle developed in line with this doctrine was the Valentine, which was a rushed into production stopgap vehicle that was actually initially rejected, only being accepted after the disaster at Dunkirk, but quickly proved to be unbelievably reliable, and at its time of conception, very well armoured and armed. It would go on to serve on every single front of the war, from France to East Asia and from Africa to the Eastern Front, with them actually being Uncle Joseph's favourite tanks the Soviets gained for the Lend-Lease. Almost all Canadian Valentines, 1,388 out of the 1,420 total made, according to Google, were sent to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease programme, with the others kept by the Canadians for training. Through its development, it saw a reasonable evolution, with the Mark 9s receiving a 6-pounder 57mm anti-tank gun, losing its coaxial machine gun, and engine changes and such. But like I said earlier, its reliability, and almost more importantly, its repairability, was unbelievably great. All of it was mandrolic, no pneumatics, no hydraulics, but rods and chains that the driver operates through sticks and a 5-speed box, either crash or synchromesh in the later models, which for the time was advanced. The pinnacle of design in infantry tanks was the Churchill. Earlier models suffered mechanical reliability issues, but as later models developed, they became key essential war material for the troops on the ground. Was it slow? Yes, but unbelievably tough, with late Mark 7s being designed to eat 88 flaks to the front. Its climbing capability was out of this world. Almost anything was a road for a Churchill, because if it chose it wanted to go there, it made its own way there. It even inspired specialised versions like the Avery, flamethrower tanks and engineering support vehicles. Despite its weight of approximately 40 tons, and it being considered underpowered by its Bedford 12-cylinder engine, producing only 350 horsepower, its climbing capability was out of this world, surprising the enemy by appearing over unclimbable hills. This was due to a large array of reasons incorporated in its design, like its low profile, its fairly even weight distribution, and the long wide tracks with deep grooves between the plates. All of that, in addition to having more road wheels than a Caterpillar has legs, the Churchill actually achieved a relatively low ground pressure. In my eyes, these attributes being implemented with the intention rather than being a positive side effect of a vehicle in action is proof that infantry tanks, amongst the other types, were being intelligently evolved to overcome the obstacles that can plague even the greatest of tanks, and in that they succeeded with vehicles like the Churchill, shown by its wartime effectiveness. The point I'm getting at is that people often like to shit on these little tanks as being weird and terrible for whatever attribute they pick. Slow, weak gun, terrible engine, etc. Very rarely bother to think of the context in which they're deployed, which doctrine they follow, and if it wasn't for the trials and tribulations of these different classes of tanks, we wouldn't be able to have the MBT that we all know and love today. Which brings me to my final point. By late 1945, the British had produced the Centurion Mark 1. This legendary vehicle would become famous for introducing the era of the main battle tank. A tank strong enough to act as an infantry tank, armed enough to destroy enemy tanks like tank destroyers, and fast enough to travel distance at a pace quicker than running to capture openings just like the cruisers. With a tank so capable, the individualistic doctrine of armoured warfare shifted to a more universal layout, and the tank classes of World War II began to become obsolete. I want to thank you greatly if you watched all the way to the end, and I hope this information is good and interesting. This is obviously the first time doing longer form content, and I could do with any tips or ideas, but like I said, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider leaving a like and hitting the subscribe button for more dives into armoured warfare. I'll see you in the next one.